In 2023, disaster strikes a beer company with a storied past.
Anheuser-Busch still reeling from its woke stunt.
Sales plummet as Bud Light fans turn on the brand with a vengeance. A brand that had once defined the very idea of an American beer company. All the way back to 1861 in St. Louis, when a young German immigrant begins work at the struggling brewery run by his future father-in-law.
Would you like a beer?
Years later, he travels to his native Germany and finds the formula for Budweiser and launches an American Dynasty based on innovation. But as the company grows to become America's #1 beer, the heirs to the Anheuser-Busch fortune battle for control of the empire, turning the family against itself, pitting brother against brother.
Dad would be rolling in his grave hearing you talk about being second place with pride.
In 1873, a young man finds himself about to take over a struggling brewery following the retirement of his father-in-law. His name is Adolphus Busch. But he doesn't know if he has what it takes.
What is it?
I don't know if I'm ready to run it all on my own.
My father, he needs you. He believed in you.
Yeah. You're right.
My great-grandfather was never a contented man. He understood that in business, if you're standing still, you're not growing, and he wanted to keep pushing forward. He was determined to be the most successful beer man in the business.
About to become responsible for running an entire brewery, young Adolphus Busch is a long way from where he started. As an 18-year-old boy traveling across the ocean from Germany, with the dream to become a successful businessman in America.
In the mid-19th century, there was a massive German immigration to the United States, and it was largely the result of the revolutions of 1848 and the crackdown by these dukedoms and principalities on anybody associated with radicalism.
When he comes to St. Louis, it's already filled with German immigrants.
Well, in the mid-1800s, there was a tremendous German immigration into the United States, and many of them came to St. Louis. And of course, they were beer drinkers.
Looking to capitalize on the booming brewery business without knowing how to brew, young Adolphus creates his own opportunity.
He started business becoming a supplier to breweries.
One of the brewery owners is named Eberhard Anheuser.
Eberhard Anheuser was a wealthy manufacturer who had migrated to the United States from Germany. He was not a manufacturer of beer. He didn't know anything about breweries.
Good afternoon. Would you like a beer? Yeah, the hops on this batch, there's something off about them.
Busch sees that Anheuser needs help and he knows he can use his salesman skills to save the struggling brewery. Adolphus may only be a supplier, but Eberhard takes a chance and hires him.
In exchange for some shares in the company, Busch convinced him that he could help him. He had to explain to Eberhard, our business isn't making beer, okay? Our business is making friends.
He made friends easily, and it helped him ingratiate himself to others who were selling his product.
Busch personally increases sales by hundreds of barrels of beer. And while he works to turn the brewery around, he falls in love and marries Eberhard's daughter, Lily. For the first time in years, E. Anheuser and Company becomes a profitable business.
He turned from losing money at 4,000 barrels a year to profitable at 27,000 barrels a year.
Adolphus continues to grow the business. And by 1873, when Eberhard Anheuser retires from the brewery, his son-in-law, Adolphus Busch, takes the reins. But he knows he can't keep making the same mediocre beer. So he decides to learn from the best, thousands of miles away. Adolphus travels through the Alps and down the Rhine, visiting hidden monasteries and mountain villages, each brewing with different techniques and ingredients. Busch tries hundreds of different recipes. When he arrives in an old village in Bohemia, he tastes a beer brewed by monks that stands out from all the others.
He found some monks who were making a beer, had been for a long time, and he liked it.
Adolphus brings the recipe for beer back to the United States and calls it Budweiser.
Slightly sweet. And light.
Busch begins brewing the beer in St. Louis, and Budweiser is an overwhelming success.
It was light, it was drinkable, it was refreshing, people really enjoyed it, and it was high quality.
It was the kind of beer that Germans drank. It was a bottom fermented beer called lager, as opposed to the top fermented beer, which is what the English and Irish drank.
Budweiser becomes the most popular beer in German-speaking St. Louis. But Adolphus Busch is already thinking much bigger. He wants to go national. But there's a problem. Lager beer is difficult to produce, store, and ship without it going bad.
It had to be sold locally. Most of it was sold in that city, or as far as your horse wagon could carry it. That's it. Busch came along and they said, how do we expand that? Yeah, he was thinking ahead of everybody.
Busch works tirelessly to find a way to keep his beer fresh longer.
Tastes good, right? That was bottled over a year ago. It should have gone completely sour by now. This could change everything.
Applying the innovations of Louis Pasteur, Adolphus discovers that briefly heating the beer to kill any microbes extends the shelf life by months. Confident the process will work, Busch takes a multi-million-dollar loan from his father-in-law to expand the business. And in 1876, he builds a new brewery to make, pasteurize, and bottle Budweiser for the masses. Soon, thousands of people throughout the region are popping open bottles of Budweiser.
Adolphus was a genius. He was a very talented industrialist. He started pasteurizing his beer, Budweiser. No one else had done that. He was the first brewer anywhere to do that. Now, he could move that beer further, have it in Kansas City, and be selling that beer. Nobody else in St. Louis could do that. And that gave him a tremendous advantage.
In 1879, in recognition of Busch's hard work, Adolphus's father-in-law renames the company Anheuser-Busch. But with mounting health issues, at the age of 73, Anheuser passes away shortly afterward in 1880, leaving the entire brewery in Adolphus's hands. While Adolphus finds success building his father-in-law's brewery into the biggest in the region, he has less success producing an heir to someday inherit the company, when 3 sons die from appendix-related medical conditions, and another is born with disabilities which require special care.
Adolphus and Lily Busch had 12 children, 5 boys and 7 girls. Unfortunately, only one boy lived past 30, and that was my grandfather, August Sr.
Now, Adolphus's dream of keeping the brewery in the family depends on his son, August, taking over the business.
Where are these from?
Sauk County, Wisconsin.
August is the opposite of Adolphus. Shy and soft-spoken, he's not interested in taking over the family business. But he doesn't want to disappoint his father.
My great-grandfather Adolphus and his son August Sr. had very different personalities. Adolphus was very outgoing, outspoken. He was a very gregarious guy and a great salesman. August, on the other hand, was more introverted and more quiet and thoughtful.
August Busch was not a beer guy in the sense that his father was. But Adolphus Busch always told him, remember the child we love most, and that's the business of making beer.
So, since we're quartered out of anything to the north,
Adolphus teaches his son everything he's learned about brewing.
thing in the west we have in jeopardy.
School was much less important back then than actually learning hands-on to our family. And so he was very, very conscientious about mentoring his son to be the next leader of the brewery. And that was his responsibility, and he took it very seriously.
Hold on, August, I'm gonna show you something.
Adolphus teaches August to only use the highest quality ingredients, down to the hops they use.
What's that smell like to you?
It smells like a good beer. It smells like a great beer.
I think my great-grandfather Adolphus was hell-bent on keeping the company in the family, because who better can you trust than your own family? And he wanted to make sure it would pass down for generations to come.
Starting with the German markets of the Midwest, Adolphus and his son worked to build Anheuser-Busch into a national brewery. But while Budweiser is the most popular brewer in Missouri, a titan of brewing is dominating the major cities of the upper Midwest. His name is Frederick Pabst.
Pabst was to his company what Adolphus Busch was to Anheuser-Busch. He was the leader of a big brewing company in Milwaukee.
Frederick Pabst sees Busch as an upstart to be squashed. He makes sure Budweiser isn't sold in the Midwestern markets he controls, including Chicago.
Elm Street, and here, off Hubbard.
It was a practice in the brewing industry for the brewer to also own the retailer. It's a practice that is now outlawed in this country. But it was an abuse, and all brewers had their corner saloons, which sold their products exclusively.
No, we're cornered out of anything north. And with the rail lines cutting through Chicago, any investments to the west, they're in jeopardy as well. But, see? This area here, I think we can at least go to there.
The South isn't known for its love of German lagers.
Well, they simply haven't had a Budweiser yet.
Adolphus sees an opportunity to reach a brand new market. He plans to sell Budweiser as far south as New Orleans and Houston. But pasteurization only protects against bacteria. It doesn't protect the beer from the heat on the long journey south. To address this problem in 1890, he utilizes a brand new technology: refrigeration on train cars, becoming the first brewer to do so.
Budweiser was the first to make refrigerated rail cars to carry the beer, and Adolphus Busch came up with the idea of having ice houses at various stops along the rail lines. And the rail cars would be refreshed with newer ice to keep the beer cold, so the beer could be kept cool in these refrigerated rail cars, reaching these long distances into the Deep South.
Busch's innovative use of refrigeration works. And soon, he's selling Budweiser throughout the South. And even west to California. And he doesn't stop there. As his reach expands, Busch buys a controlling stake in every aspect of his brewing business.
Adolphus created a vertically integrated company before anyone had a word for it. He owned everything from his vats that he brewed it in to everything that packaged it and sold it.
Transportation, warehousing, distributing. He's kind of like the modern day Jeff Bezos.
Now at the top of his game, and armed with his signature Budweiser beer, Adolphus Busch sees the chance to dethrone Frederick Pabst by taking him down on the world stage at the Columbian Exposition of 1893.
It was essentially a World's Fair in Chicago, and they had a big beer contest there, and Adolphus Busch was there to make sure his beer won, because beer companies in those days, before we had the kind of advertising we have today, used the winning of medals at fairs and events such as the Columbia Exposition to market their products.
Breweries across the world compete, and 6 judges will vote to decide the winner. The judges announce the final tallies. Anheuser-Busch scores 94.3, and Pabst Brewing 94.6.
Pabst won the blue ribbon. Adolphus kind of went nuts. It was stolen. Somebody cheated because his was obviously the best beer. And he should have won. And he just wouldn't accept it.
Pabst hangs a blue ribbon on his beers and christens them Pabst Blue Ribbon. And with that, PBR is born. Despite Budweiser's second-place finish at the World's Fair, Adolphus's business keeps growing. And over the years, his son August matures into a respected executive at Anheuser-Busch. In 1913, Adolphus Busch passes away at the age of 74 while visiting Germany. And when his body is returned to St. Louis, the entire city honors his life and work.
Adolphus's funeral in St. Louis would be something akin to like the King of England dying in terms of the people who showed up. I mean, 100,000 people turned out. And it went on and on and on. The amount of money that was spent was just amazing.
He was very respected in the business world. He was a larger-than-life figure. He was charismatic. He was very charming, very well-loved by everybody.
Adolphus Busch has left a legacy remembered and celebrated by the world. After his father's death, August, now almost 50 years old, reluctantly takes over the company he never wanted to run. But on June 28, 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary throws the world into chaos. The First World War devastates Europe, and its effects are felt in the United States as anti-German sentiment reaches a boiling point.
The war starts in 1914. That kicks off an anti-German hysteria that resulted in some ridiculous things. Frankfurters now were called hot dogs. Hamburgers were called Liberty sandwiches.
World War I, really, they slammed the German breweries. German had been the language of all the Anheuser-Busch plants because they were all from Germany. Well, they got rid of that. They couldn't speak German anymore.
Anheuser-Busch sales plummet from $18 million a year before the war to $12 million by 1917. But August's troubles are only just beginning. Just 2 months after the war's end in November 1918, the Volstead Act is ratified, making prohibition the law of the land. Selling alcoholic beverages is now illegal, and hundreds of breweries are forced to close their doors.
Before Prohibition, there were more than 600 breweries in this country, and by the end of Prohibition, only about 150 of those survived. It wiped out industries.
But August refuses to give up.
He found different things for the plant to do. He would sell refrigerators or ice cream and engines, anything to keep going.
Helping August to keep the company afloat are his two sons, Adolphus III, the eldest, and August Jr., known as Augie. And the brothers quickly become rivals, vying for the top spot.
There's always been tension within the Busch family, mainly because they're all competing for the same thing. They wanted to run Anheuser-Busch. They all wanted control.
Adolphus III is named vice president.
Go ahead and explain to me what happened.
And is expected to one day lead the company.
And you thought that was a good idea?
August's son, Adolphus III, did not have a lot of verve. He wasn't exciting, but he was competent.
August's younger son, Gussy, starts his career at the bottom, scrubbing beer vats, and by 1924 is named superintendent of the brewery.
Gussy was boisterous, loud. He was sort of a carbon copy of his grandfather, Adolphus. And he was the man who was actually running the manufacturing process of that time.
Under Gussy's leadership, Anheuser-Busch mass produces a successful alternative to beer.
They made a malt beverage called Bevo, which was a non-alcoholic beer, which really kept the company going through the first part of Prohibition.
They kept the brewery part open by brewing things that didn't have alcohol. They made a number of malt syrup products, and Budweiser had no alcohol in it. They never stopped trying to come up with something.
Because of their efforts, over the next 10 years, the brewery fights off bankruptcy.
This was the historic moment for all the citizens of the United States. Franklin Delano Roosevelt fixed his signature to the bill that an entire nation anxiously awaited.
And finally, in 1933, the 21st Amendment to the Constitution is ratified, ending national prohibition. To celebrate, Anheuser-Busch sends a wagon full of beer to the White House, pulled by a team of Clydesdale horses.
They decided to use Clydesdales to deliver a case of beer to the White House, where FDR presided. It became so popular that they used the Clydesdales from then on, and still do today, in their marketing campaign.
The company drops all of its other businesses and turns back to making beer.
Anheuser-Busch had an advantage because it stayed in business, albeit not the beer-making business. But they could see that their plant could be up and running very quickly, and it gave Anheuser-Busch a head start.
Despite the hopeful outlook for the brewery, the past 20 years have taken their toll on August.
August Busch had a lot of pressure going on in his life. He was trying to keep a beer company running when his product was outlawed. He had health issues of his own.
The stress of keeping 2,000 employees employed and keeping Anheuser-Busch going through that time had just taken it out of him. He was now suffering from gout, from heart failure, and from anxiety that there was no medicine for back in those days.
After years of struggle to keep the company afloat, he is distraught.
He was not in good shape toward the end. He wrote a letter goodbye and just shot himself.
August Busch Sr. is mourned by many. His determination and ingenuity saved Anheuser-Busch and thousands of jobs in St. Louis. During his time as president, he led the brewery through its most challenging years.
The city loved him. I mean, he became a big hero because he saved them.
After their father's death, Adolphus Busch III becomes president of the brewery.
When his father died, he ran the company tolerably well, but he didn't set the world on fire.
And Gussy Bush settles for first vice president and general manager, even though he feels better suited to running the company. The 1930s are a period of steady growth for the brewery. But it's not long before the world is thrown into war again. Afraid that anti-German sentiment might hurt the brewery as it did during World War I, Adolphus III devises a plan to make sure no one can question Anheuser-Busch's patriotism.
Adolphus Busch, he had the company manufacture airplane parts, ammunition, gun parts, all kinds of things to support the war effort. And it turned out to really help sales of Budweiser because it really showed his patriotic stance to America and what America meant to him. And so it became the American beer.
Not to be outdone by his brother, 6 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Gussy volunteers, and at the age of 43 becomes a colonel, working in logistics for the Army. Despite Adolphus III's successes displaying the brewery's patriotism, Budweiser remains in second place. Although Anheuser-Busch sells 3.7 million barrels in 1944, Pabst, another brewery with German roots, is still the most popular beer in the United States.
Colonel Busch here. Son of a... Tell me, how long was it in there? How long? All right, no, I trust you. I trust your taste. All right, listen to me. You pour it all out, okay? I don't care what it costs. You give me your word right now that it all goes down the drain.
It wasn't always easy for Adolphus III and his brother, my father, Gussy, to get along. There was one instance where there was a batch of beer, about $1 million worth, that was tasting off. And my father, of course, being in the head of the beer division, was also part of quality control, and he wanted to destroy the beer. Adolphus said, no, we're not going to destroy the beer, we're going to go ahead and sell it. So my father, Gussy, went behind his back and ordered the beer to be destroyed.
You listen to me, if my brother has a problem with that, he can take it up with me.
After the war is over, Gussy returns to St. Louis and demands Adolphus raise his standards.
Colonel Busch, what a surprise.
I've got some ideas.
We're brewing more beer than ever.
We're second place. We need to make some changes. You know I'm right.
I know you think you're right. Sales are up over last year and the year before. That's got to count for something.
Dad would be rolling in his grave hearing you talk about being second place with pride. We're not done.
But before the two brothers can sort out their differences, tragedy strikes. In 1946, Adolphus Busch III passes away from a sudden cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 55.
Adolphus dies unexpectedly, and my dad, Gussy, is the next one in line to take over the company. Now, the board understood that Dad was able and willing to handle the beer division because that's what he had been doing all along. But could he be CEO of the entire company? That was the question that the board had.
Anheuser-Busch meant everything to Gussy Bush. It was very important to be a part of this big company, being well known throughout the world, and to have all the money and the power and to be able to do whatever he wanted to do.
In a divided vote, Gussy Busch takes his brother's place as president and CEO of Anheuser-Busch. And now he has one mission: to overtake Pabst once and for all. Gussy takes on additional investment and doubles the size of the brewery. He opens new plants and spends heavily on advertising.
During his time of leading the brewery, it was a period of great growth. They went from 1 brewery in the United States to 9 breweries in the United States.
He supercharged the company when he took over by expansion. He just went at it.
In 1947, Pabst loses its place at the top. But not to Anheuser-Busch. Schlitz, another Milwaukee-based brewery, is now dominating beer sales.
During that time, Pabst and Schlitz and Budweiser were always in a very tight race to see who would be #1. And it was definitely annoying to everyone in the brewery, but especially my dad, who was hell-bent on being #1 and couldn't stand being #2.
Gussy's struggles at the company are reflected in his personal life. His marriage to Elizabeth Overton Busch is falling apart. And they divorce in 1952. The divorce drives a wedge between Gussy and his son, August Busch III, or Augie, as he is better known. Later that same year, Gussy remarries to a young woman from Switzerland named Trudy Buchholzer.
Trudy Buchholzer was well-schooled, spoke several languages, cultured, very finished. Night and day compared to Gussy Busch. She was a partner in both the business and family for Gussy Busch at that time.
Gussy works to transform the image of Anheuser-Busch by creating Grant's Farm, where he lives with his new wife, Trudy.
Dad was a great marketing guy, and he understood how to build brand loyalty and how to market his products. So he opened up Grant's Farm, our home. He built the theme park to market Budweiser, where people could enjoy themselves, where they could sample Budweiser, where they could bring their family and friends. He hooked them forever.
Life at Grant's Farm was a fairy tale. It was a big castle with animals of all types. We had elephants, we had monkeys. I mean, what more could you want?
But Gussy and Trudy's dedication to the company comes at a cost.
Some of the challenges my husband faced growing up in this legendary family was that he didn't have his parents around like most families would have. He was raised by nannies, chauffeurs, butlers, valets, the employees at Grant's Farm.
In 1953, the owner of the Cardinals is threatening to sell the beloved St. Louis baseball team. And Gussy sees an opportunity to finally get the edge on his competitors.
He really didn't know that much about baseball, but what he did know was that baseball sold a lot of beer.
Gussy saw that beer and sports were a perfect match, and moves to officially tie Anheuser-Busch to America's pastime. Buying the St. Louis Cardinals for $3.75 million, the equivalent of over $400 million today. Anheuser-Busch and the Cardinals are a winning combination, and soon millions of people are attending games and drinking Budweiser.
He visioned it as a 50,000-seat tavern sitting in the sun. It was one of the greatest marketing gambits of all time. And it connected it to sports, and that made everything go crazy.
Gussy Busch's investments and relentless determination pay off. By 1957, Anheuser-Busch is selling over 37 million barrels a year and becomes the #1 brewery in the United States. Gussy Bush has overseen growth that his father couldn't have imagined, but he hasn't invested in the next generation, leaving his eldest son, Augie, to work his way up through the ranks. And by 1963, at 26 years old, he can't help but resent his father.
If you're the firstborn son of a Bush, you're expected at some point to be in a position to take over the operations of the brewing company. And that puts a strain on the relationship between father and son.
Augie believes that his father lacks focus. The brewery needs to modernize. Augie is promoted to vice president of marketing, one of the key jobs in the company, and elected to the board of directors.
He was always very, very business-oriented, and it was all about Anheuser-Busch and the business for him, and one day becoming the head of the brewery.
As Gussy Bush's oldest son and the assumed heir to the Anheuser-Busch kingdom, Augie expects to occupy a special place in the Busch family. Instead, Augie still lives in his legendary father's shadow and has never been guaranteed the top spot at the company.
Yeah, now what's this article about? Augie? Really? Well, I know there's a lot of speculation on that, but no. Augie will not automatically fill my position. I've expressed this to the board, to him, to all of our colleagues. I would love nothing more than for him to take over upon my death, but he needs to earn it.
Gussy makes it clear he intends to hold on to power until he drops dead.
He understood how hard his father worked for the company. He understood how hard his brother worked for the company. He understood how hard his great-grandfather worked and what they built. And they built this incredible company, and letting it go at that point was not something he could allow himself to do.
But as the years go by, Gussy starts to show signs of his age.
Gussy hung on to the reins of the company far too long. Everybody knew it, except him. He would do things that were very disruptive. He was drinking a lot, more so than he had before.
And when tragedy strikes the Busch family again, it hits close to home. In 1974, his 8-year-old daughter is killed.
The death of Gussy's daughter in an automobile accident changed his life forever. He seemed to have lost his zest for life, seemed to have lost interest in daily activities. It affected him deeply, and maybe affected his personality to the extent that people thought he was no longer up to the business of running the company.
He could not function at the company anymore, so his son, Augie, decided that he had to be replaced, and the executives agreed it had to be done. So it fell to Augie to mount a coup against his father.
Understanding that it's up to him, Augie Busch coordinates with the board in secret, and soon he has the votes. All but his father's most loyal friends on the board agree. It's time for new leadership at the company.
August the 3rd went to the board members and explained that they needed to vote him out and vote August himself in.
Yes, put him through.
What is going on here?
There was a vote. It's done. You're done.
That's impossible.
Maybe I'm not being clear. You've been forced down as CEO and chairman of the company. You can keep the baseball team if you don't make this difficult.
If I could change anything about the family history or the legacy of this family, it would be, I wish that we all could have gotten along. I wish there wasn't such a succession story.
Gussy is voted out by the board. And in 1975, his son Augie takes over the company. As CEO, Augie doesn't waste a moment making changes. Knowing that the brewery needs to target new customers.
Augie was much more thoughtful and methodical, bringing in people who really understood marketing and making it more of a science, an economic science, rather than just making friends and selling beer.
He came up with the idea of using real people in their advertising.
This Bud's for everybody who puts in a hard day's work.
Common, regular guys, the people who drank beer in the bars, would be the people in the ads.
This Bud's for you, for all you do. The king of beers is coming through.
Yeah, just for you, that distinctively clean, crisp taste that says Budweiser. This Bud's for you.
Give me a light. Bud Light?
But the biggest change that Augie makes is introducing a new beer, Bud Light.
Bud Light became first the #2 selling beer, and eventually the #1 selling beer, outselling Budweiser.
Though Augie brings the company to new heights, he hasn't spoken to his father in years and doesn't get a chance to.
Beer Baron Adolphus Busch Jr. is dead. He's the man who built the Anheuser-Busch Beer Company into the country's top brewery. Busch was also the owner of the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. He was 90 years old.
In 1989, Gussy Bush passes away. A beloved figure for his impact on Anheuser-Busch, the city of St. Louis, and its baseball team, the Cardinals.
Gussy's legacy was of one of the great beer barons of all time. He took that company where no one thought it would go. He made the Cardinals one of the best baseball teams in the history of baseball. He was beloved in St. Louis. People now still remember Gussy. He was really in love with the city of St. Louis.
Augie knows their place on top is secure, so he turns to preparing his son, August the 4th, to run the company.
August the 4th was the firstborn son of August the 3rd, Augie. He was destined to take over the company the way it is in the family.
August the 4th, my nephew, who was August the 3rd's son, was a very talented guy. He understood the beer business and was head of some of those great marketing campaigns that AB had.
Given control over the advertising by his father, August the 4th launches iconic campaigns.
Wise.
But despite his success in marketing, there are those that have doubts about August the 4th.
Throughout its history, Anheuser-Busch had a leader who could step forward and marshal the company's forces and move forward, but August Busch IV was not that person. There were these dark periods in his life that he had to overcome.
When August the 4th was in college at the Arizona State University, one night after a day of drinking at the bars, he picked up a waitress at this restaurant he was at, and they took off in his car, his Corvette, and took off on this country road, and he flipped it. She was killed, and he left the scene of the accident and walked home.
Blood samples taken from him were reportedly either lost or damaged, and he was never charged. 2 years later, he got into a high-speed chase with police in St. Louis and was accused of intentionally trying to run the officers over.
Despite the warning signs, Augie is unwilling to break with tradition, and in 2006, hands August IV control of Anheuser-Busch. It's a huge risk, given what he knows about his son.
You know what they say sometimes, blood is thicker than water, and August III couldn't see anyone else taking over the reins from him other than his son, August IV.
As the company's new president, August IV faces an unprecedented challenge. While Anheuser-Busch dominates the beer business in the United States, the rise of major international conglomerates seems unstoppable. InBev, SABMiller, Heineken, and Carlsberg together control over 75% of the revenue of all beer sales worldwide.
So just as the post-war era brought us this age of consolidation, where you have the emergence of a few national distributors of beer, the 21st century brings us globalization.
The beer-making business had become global, and Anheuser-Busch was no longer the big kahuna.
The biggest of these corporations, InBev, moves to buy a controlling share of Anheuser-Busch.
Not only did they understand how to take it over financially, but they also saw a problem with leadership, and it was kind of a perfect storm for InBev to come in and swoop up Anheuser-Busch.
And in the end, August Busch is presented with a tremendous challenge of a competitive company, InBev, which really isn't a beer company. It's run by a bunch of bankers, but they're going to swallow his company, and he's not up to the job of keeping it from happening.
It's one of the most iconic names in American business. Anheuser-Busch, America's largest brewer, is being taken over by Belgian-Brazilian brewer InBev in a $52 billion deal. That means control over Anheuser-Busch moves overseas, although its American headquarters will remain in St. Louis.
And in July 2008, the deal is finalized. Anheuser-Busch is purchased by InBev for approximately $52 billion, leaving the Bushes with a $13.4 billion fortune.
InBev came in with the killer offer. It was the biggest cash offer in the history of business. And the family could get out, and they could all go their own way. And that's what happened.
Anheuser-Busch remains one of the largest and most successful beer companies in the world. Though a headline-making scandal spirals out of control, devastating the company's old-fashioned American image overnight.
Anheuser-Busch still reeling from its woke stunt.
In April of 2023, a promotion with a transgender influencer prompts protests from beer drinkers across the country, including Kid Rock.
Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch.
Bud Light's sales crash, declining 26.8% by August. Such a slump that Billy Busch, Gussy Bush's son, offers to buy back the brand.
I think it would be a win-win situation for both of us, for my family and for InBev, if they sold it back to us, and we could really bring the values back that Budweiser and Bud Light were built on.
Although the Busch family lost control of the brewery and have been unsuccessful in their attempts to regain control of the company, their legacy remains.
Anheuser-Busch really gave back to the city of St. Louis and really built this city.
Very few companies last as long as Anheuser-Busch did. Very few companies last and remain as powerful and number one as they did, and it can all be attributed to those Bush men who ran the company during turbulent times. And I think it's a remarkable story.